So now we're going to start solving missing parts of a right triangle. So to do this, we're going to use trigonometry ratios. So I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the formulas for these trig ratios and what we're going to have to do to set these up. And then we'll get into how to solve for whatever we're trying to find. So there's three main trigonometry ratios. They're pronounced sine, cosine, and tangent. So abbreviated though, it's just SIN for sine, COS for cosine, TAN for tangent. So what they are, it's the ratio of two sides of a right triangle. So we talked about ratios back when we did proportions, where it's comparing, kind of like we did like rise over run or things like that. So it's kind of like this comparison of two sides. So by using these trig like buttons in our calculator, these trig functions, these trig ratios, we can find either angles or we can find missing sides. Okay, so notice in the formulas, it's really three formulas here. So this is the first one, sine, and it says that sine of the angle is the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. So notice on the left side, the thing that we can plug in is my angle or my degrees. And then on the right side, there's two things that we can plug in or that we can solve for, and they're both sides. Okay, so on the left side of these equations, we have our angle along with the trig part of it, and then on the right side, we have two of the sides. Okay, so sine is the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Then the next one is cosine. So cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Again, angle on the left side for that capital A, and then two of the sides. Okay, again, two of the sides here. And then same with tangent. So tangent, this is the last formula. So there's three of them, and I'll tell you why in a second. So with these three, again, angle on the left side, two sides over here. Okay, so if we think about why we need three formulas, it's always the ratio of two sides. So if we have a triangle, and we'll go back up to those other ones in a minute. If we have a triangle, and let's say we've got A, B, and C, like we just did with the Pythagorean theorem, if we want to combine two of the sides, there's going to be three combinations of that. Like if I combine A and C, that's one combination. Or if I combine B and A, that's another combination. Getting a little messy here, but or C and B, that's a different combination. Okay, so that's why we need three different formulas. Okay, so notice that we're using opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So we have to do our labeling correctly to figure out which is the correct formula to use. So this first top one, if this is my angle down here, hypotenuse is like we've been talking about, and I'm going to abbreviate that HYP. So hypotenuse is always across from the 90 degrees. So put that down first. And it's always the biggest, remember, the longest side. Opposite is the one that's across from whatever the angle is. So notice how I have this A down low. Opposite side of that would be like if I go all the way across. Like draw a line straight across from the angle, that's the opposite side of the angle. Versus then the one right next to it, to the right, that's the adjacent. Think of it like your adjacent neighbor, your next door neighbor. If your house is A, then your next door neighbor is right where it says ADJ, adjacent. Like that would be your property line. That vertical line right there would be like the property line. So that'd be your adjacent side. Okay, so let's do the other ones. The first one all the way to the left. So angle A is down in the bottom, so label hypotenuse. Then opposite of angle A, go across from angle A, so that's going to be the vertical side. And then the adjacent will be the one down on the bottom. Okay, now the one next to it on the bottom, here's angle A. Hypotenuse will be that one across from 90 degrees. Notice a lot of times hypotenuse is the one that's like the angled side. The vertical and the horizontal are typically the opposite adjacent. Not for the last one that we haven't done yet, you can see, but for this one, hypotenuse is that bottom angled one. Opposites across, opposite of angle A, all the way across, that'd be that vertical side, and then adjacent's the one. Notice how if I put that arch on the angle, it's touching that arc that I'm making on that angle. Now the last one, angle A, this one's different because see how the 90 degree doesn't meet like the floor. It's not like a floor to ceiling situation, it's turned around weird. So the hypotenuse is actually the bottom across from the 90 degrees. Opposite will be across from the A, so that's the right side, and then adjacent is the one right next to the angle. Now with all of these, if I had switched where my angle was, I'm gonna do it on one of them. Let me see. I'm gonna redraw the one we just did right next to it. Okay, so if here was my 90, this is still my hypotenuse no matter what. But if I put angle B down here, if I am focusing on angle B, notice how then opposite is the one on the left, adjacent's the one on the right. So this is where we kind of have to be careful of what's the angle I'm focusing on, which one's opposite, which one is adjacent. So we always are going to do our labeling first before I start using my formulas. Okay, so back to the formulas, and this is kind of a, if you've learned this before, you maybe have heard SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. So I'll probably jot that down sometimes. So that means sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So it's abbreviation for the different parts of the formula. So the first is the trig part, then the next two are the top side and then the bottom side. Or I like to write it like this. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so there's my SO. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that's just kind of a way to look at it, to not have to write out the whole long formula. I mean, you have them on your formula sheet, so keep that handy as a reference, but this could be helpful just as kind of clean things up, make it look like there's not so much going on once we get used to using the full formula. Now these next two, we're going to do this in class, so skip those. And now the next three videos are going to be going through three different situations. And it's all dependent on where in the formula we don't know the either side or the angle. So situation is going to be if we don't know the side on top, 2 is going to be if I don't know the side on the bottom, and then 3 is going to be what if I don't know the angle. So it's, the calculation is going to be a little different for each. So we'll set it up the same always, but the calculations will be a little different. And so that's a little introduction.